Hey everybody! A couple of weeks ago I did my Twitter 10,000 follower Q&A special, and there was one question that I wasn't able to answer in the moment. Well, I didn't answer it probably as well as I should have, and in amongst basically the breadth of questions that I was being asked, I didn't really have the space to go into it properly, and I sort of left it. I didn't do it justice, and I've had a couple of chats with people since, and I decided to do another video just specifically on that. And the question was about characterization, and the question was, how do you approach writing characters whose background, personality, and values are widely different from your own? So basically, the question of how do you come up with believable characters that are not you? And yeah, I mean, I think I could, like, in the Q&A, I basically said it comes down to artistry. And there is a lot of truth in that. But there are also a lot of tricks you can use, or a lot of things, practices that you can get into that really help with it. And obviously in the scope of the Q&A, which went on for an hour as it was, I didn't have a chance to really get into those. So now that I've chatted to a few more people and it's come to light, maybe, hopefully I can help. I am not in any way qualified, not really, but hopefully some of my specific methods can help. And I mean, also a lot of this helps me because I do a lot of stuff just naturally without really thinking about it. But when I get asked a question like this, it really helps me to dive into it, and I have to sit there and have to think, okay, yeah, how do I do this? How do I go about this process? How do I make it happen? And that's really useful for me as well, because it means I understand my own processes better. So yeah, hopefully I'll be able to help, and hopefully this will be helpful. So I guess where we start with this is it's all about sort of getting to know your people. So when you're getting to know a person, and I'm going to use the word person here and not character, because I think it genuinely helps to think of them as people. And I think that it's common practice that people expect you to know 100% of everything about the characters that you write. And I don't think that that's 100% true. I think you need to know at least 85% of the things about your character, but you don't need to know everything. And a really important thing to do about your characters is work out what you don't know about the characters. Because every person has things about them that are a mystery. And knowing what you don't know about them is important. But we'll come back to that. Okay, so first up, we'll work out what you do know and what you do have to know. So there's things about characters that you want to know, like their physical appearance. So there's, age, height, hair colour, skin colour, if you're doing sci-fi, species, things like that. Next comes like everything else. So you've got things like personal details, so family, whether they've got siblings, what their politics is, whether or not they've had schooling or education, that kind of stuff. But all of these are outside perspectives. They're not a personality. So they help to form a personality, but they're not personality traits. I mean, I have a sister, for example, but me having a sister isn't a personality trait. Granted, growing up with my sister probably helped shape me as a person, but if somebody says, hey, tell me something that differentiates you as a person, like what you believe, what's your like inner mechanism, I'm not going to say I had a sister. Well, I have a sister. It's like, okay, good, now tell me about you. That's the essence here. So what are personality details? And when you're getting into this, people talk about the broad strokes. So they're like, oh yes, what are your motives? What are your interests? What are your desires? Or, their desires and everything. And yeah, all of this is very important. But it's broad strokes. And if you fill in all of these, you get these broad strokes sorted out, but you're still going to be left with a cardboard cutout person, you're not going to know a huge amount. So for instance, with the motives, interests, desires idea, we can apply that to Frodo Baggins and say Frodo is motivated by fear and a need to save the world. He's interested in second breakfast and supper, and he wants to get the ring to Mordor. But at no point does this actually tell us anything about what Frodo, like who Frodo is as a person, or how he would react to certain tense situations, or how he interacts with people. None of that is relevant when it comes to those things. So a really great way to get to the essence of a character is to hold them up alongside another character and talk about what's different between them, and what's similar, but what's different. So take a theme from your story and think about how each of your characters approaches this theme. Now, I can talk about two of my characters without giving too much of my story away. I mean, I don't think these are great secrets. If you've listened to the audio dramas or read The Dark, or, if you're interested in any way in that universe, you'll have got this. So Nathaniel Dex and Tristan Crail, both are very unpleasant characters, and they like to control other people and use them as a means to their own end. But they are very different in some fundamental ways. So how do I know this? How do I make it tangible? This was something that came up in some comments from my agent when I was doing agent amends, and he asked some very interesting questions that made me really solidify how these characters are different, because in a lot of ways in the book they are very similar, and just sort of teasing out a few more of those differences made a big difference to the narrative, and sort of giving readers an anchor point on each of them. So they are very different in some fundamental ways. Let's talk about how Nathaniel and Tristan feel about killing, because killing is a big, obviously my book is very unpleasant, there's killing in it. Okay, so for Nathaniel, killing is something he doesn't do at all. For Tristan does a lot of it. Now, the reason Nathaniel doesn't kill is because he values self-control, and killing people is something that he could potentially become addicted to. And he's aware of this. He's aware of this side of him, and he knows that if he got into it and started doing it, it might lead him to keep doing it. It could become a distraction for him. It could impact other areas of his life. He won't do it. Tristan, on the other hand, nothing's it. He has zero emotional response to killing at all. And actually, I think Tristan is far more terrifying in that respect, because he has no reason not to do it. And that is tricky. He's like most people don't kill, obviously, because it's wrong and it's horrendous, but also because they'd suffer as a result. Like it would eat you up. It's something that is just wrong. He has none of that. Just without even thinking about it, and go to sleep that night and get his good 8 hours. So yeah, I find that more terrifying in many ways. So both Nathaniel and Tristan are fine with the idea of killing, the concept of killing, but each of them has a very different take on it now. So imagine, let's sort of place them in a scenario that might come up in the book. It doesn't. I'm making this up. So Tristan has just presented Nathaniel, who's the boss, with evidence that one of his agents has been withholding information. So Nathaniel, let's give this, so this agent has been withholding information. Tristan's come to the boss and said, this is the situation. Scenario 1. Nathaniel tells Tristan to kill them. No surprises there. It's exactly what Tristan was expecting him to say. Tristan has no emotional response to the idea of killing them, so no drama on that front. 2. Second option. Nathaniel tells Tristan he'll kill them himself. So now that we know about Nathaniel's tendencies, Tristan certainly knows about them, that would instantly raise some issues in Tristan's mind. Tristan would be very cautious about that. He would be very surprised, and he would approach it with some trepidation. And I think that Tristan, he has a control complex, as we've said before. He would be fast forwarding and thinking, is this going to be a problem? Is this going to happen again? Is Nathaniel going to start doing this over and over? Is he going to become distracted? What kind of effect can this have on the company? And will probably be ultimately asking himself, should he then say, no, I will go and do it? Or say, are you sure? So Tristan might choose in that moment to question that. And there would be an interesting conversation potentially. So that's another option that we know. So knowing that they're both control freaks in this way, there is another option, another scenario that could be quite interesting to explore. So Nathaniel tells Tristan not to kill the agent. Full stop. Now Tristan's reaction to this would be suspicion. He knows that Nathaniel is a violent man. He knows that he has no concerns with ending life. So if he's letting this agent live, there's a reason for it. And unless in this conversation Nathaniel discloses what his reason for it is, that's going to play on Tristan's mind, and he is going to be very concerned about that. It's gonna play on his mind for scenes and scenes to come. Because he needs that control. And if Nathaniel's saying don't kill him, it's because Nathaniel's got a plan. And if Tristan doesn't know what that is, it's going to bother him. It's going to be a problem. So if you think about the fact that you've got two characters who have something in common, you can select a theme from your book, a potentially mundane, ordinary thing that comes up, and play it out and explore how their different perspectives on this thing that they've got in common will mean that they react. And gradually, as you do that, you get into their headspace. So how I do this is often I am just wandering around the house having whisper conversations, and it drives my spouse nuts. Like they think I'm nuts, but I will be constantly playing out little scenes in my head and having conversations like that between the characters in my head. It's constant. And what I'm doing is this, mentally speaking, I'm putting the characters in different scenarios and putting them through conversations all the time mentally. And it really helps me to get into the headspace. I don't write it down, I do it on the go. And whether or not you're the kind of person that does it on the go or you'd want to write it down, whatever works. But I find it really, really useful doing this. So just to sort of cement this idea, let's sort of think about some made up characters that do not come from my universe. So I don't know much about them either. So let's talk about, I've written down a bit of a framework here about Lydia and Barry. Okay, so Lydia and Barry are both afraid of heights. That's the thing they've got in common. So Lydia is the kind of person who accepts her fear and finds ways to deal with it. And she does this by, sort of deep breathing, talking herself through it and rationalizing her fear. And she doesn't run away from it. She's like, yes, I'm afraid of heights, but I will overcome. Barry is the kind of person who knows he's afraid of heights, so he doesn't go up anything tall. He doesn't go near the edge of anything. He if he does go near the edge, if he is near the edge of something, he freaks out. He does not like it and kicks and screams basically until he's not near the edge of something. So they both share this fear, but they have a very different approach to dealing with it. And I'm going to say right now that this fear is not a phobia. Phobias are very different. This is just a heightened sense of self-preservation. It's just, yeah, it's just that. So knowing that they've got this similar trait, knowing the difference, we can say that, okay, so imagine if they had to walk, you know those bridges that have got like the rope across the middle and then the ropes that you hold on to, and you have to like, put your feet one in front of the other. So it's not quite tightrope walking, but it's like tightrope walking light, it's, you got something to hold on to, but it's still pretty dangerous. Imagine they have to get across something like that. So Lydia would be really scared, but she'd be trying to get across this rope, and she'd be talking herself through it. She would be breathing, she would be rationalizing, she would be giving herself a pep talk the entire way. Barry would be freaking out back on the other side, not getting anywhere near the edge, not being useful at all, and failing basically at getting anywhere near this rope bridge. So knowing that Lydia shares this fear, and knowing that Barry has this fear, like if we play it out between them, knowing that Lydia has this fear but has managed to come up with ways to get round it, she might be trying to help Barry. But given that she's also frightened of the situation, she would probably be likely to snap at him, because we've got to add that stress. So yes, she's trying to help him, but she's stressed about it, so she will probably snap. And I mean, if Lydia was a different type of person, if Lydia wasn't afraid of heights, she would probably snap at Barry too, but it would be two very different types of snap. And that's what's interesting, and this is where this exercise gets fun, because we know how Lydia functions, and we know that if Lydia, like, because of her motivations, Lydia's snap is going to be very specific. Now, knowing that Lydia is also afraid of heights, her snap is likely to be along the lines of, just stop panicking and breathe. Just breathe through it. Okay, just stop panicking. It's going to be like, just breathe. That would be her snap, because she's getting stressed out herself. Now, if Lydia isn't afraid of heights, she might snap, but her snap would come from a place of no empathy. Not because she's stressed out by the situation. So Lydia, who is afraid of heights, is stressed out by the situation, and that would make her snap. Lydia, who is not afraid of heights, is not stressed by the situation, just snapping because she's got no empathetic response to what Barry is going through. It's just making a noise and she doesn't understand. So if Lydia wasn't afraid of heights, the Lydia who's just snapping because she doesn't understand is more likely to say, stop making a fuss, it's not a big deal, you'll be fine, just get over it already. So the Lydia who is afraid of heights would never say, it's no big deal. She'd never say, get over it already, because she's afraid of heights. She knows it's a big deal. She knows that he's not just going to get over it already. And this is where this exercise is really interesting, because if you know how each of them is afraid of heights, or how each of them would approach this situation, you know exactly how they would snap. You know exactly why they would be frazzled in that situation. You know exactly how they would approach the other person, or why, and why that tension would be arising. And is the tension arising because they sympathise and empathise, or is it arising from a complete lack of empathy? You know, is that tension due to the fact that they have no idea what the other person is going through, and therefore, like, where is this coming from? It's irrational, it's unreasonable. Stop. You know? It's a completely different place. And that's why this exercise is so cool. So yeah, like, giving your characters something in common and then making it slightly different one from the other in how they approach it. It can lead to interesting depth of character. And this now raises lots of questions like, why is Lydia the kind of person to have come up with ways to overcome her fear? How did she do that and why? And are we ever going to find out why? Or are we just going to see this personality trait in other scenarios throughout the story? Like, is she going to have other things about her that she just works through? Or is this going to reflect on the way she approaches challenges, which is, yes, it's difficult, but I will get through it, as opposed to someone like Barry who might be like, it's difficult, therefore I won't try. You know, is that going to be something that comes up more and more for them and how they approach the challenges that happen throughout your narrative? So yeah, that's a really useful tool when it comes to character building and getting in their heads. Two characters, something in common, very different ways of approaching it. Let them at it. It's great fun. So something completely different now on another method note, music. Now, anyone who knows me in any way, shape or form knows that music looms large in my life. And quite a few writers have playlists on Spotify or on iTunes or whatever for their book. So like a playlist of tracks that help that exemplify their book. I have them per character, and this really helps me to get into the headspace of each character. And this really helps me with chapters because my perspective changes throughout, and I have 3 main characters. And so I have, before I swap chapters, sometimes I will play a few pieces of songs from their playlist, and it really helps me to get into their mind. And it means that because I'm sort of building these characters all the time and I add tracks to them, to their playlist, each of the playlists that they have are quite distinct. Like the 3 of them, I got them for Varian, Isra and Ren, who are the kids in my story. You know, at different times I've been listening to random things and I thought, oh, that is such an Isra track. Okay, I'll add it to her playlist. You know, or that is, you know, that really exemplifies a moment in Varian's story. I'll put it in Varian's playlist. And whether it's a tone or like a mood, or if the lyrics are particularly poignant, or, you know, just something, it goes in the playlist. And now each of the playlists is very eclectically them as individuals. And yeah, they have tracks in common, but they were raised together. And those common tracks tend to be from like when they were kids, or like an overarching theme of their shared experiences, in my head anyway. Whereas, you know, the other tracks are more like their attitude towards something personally. And yeah, I'll link in the description below, because, you know, you could, they're on public on Spotify, and you could maybe like have a look at those playlists and see what I mean by difference in tone. And maybe you'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. Like Isra's playlist is completely different to Ren's playlist, which is completely different to Varian's playlist. And yeah, so that really helps, especially if I'm not able to get into writing, but I've only got like half an hour to write something, and I'm in the middle of a Ren playlist and I have to jump into it. I'll stick his playlist on. Like, I'm in the middle of a Ren chapter. I'll stick his playlist on, and it helps me to get into the mood. Okay, so somebody asked me about a character's wants and needs. And developing a character's wants and needs. How do those wants and needs change within the story? So you've got this character, you know that they're afraid of heights, but how do their wants and needs change, and how does that character development occur? And what I would say is that a person's wants and needs change depending on big events in their lives. So there will be a moment where everything changes. And in narratives, this event is usually something that the reader can see. So in real life, big events could happen completely internally. And, you know, like something changes, like there's internal struggles, and then suddenly, boom, one in like average stormy Wednesday, a realization slides into place. It's a big event and it changes you forever. But in story, for the sake of story, normally those things need to be seen. The reader has to see them happening. So again, I'm going to go back to Frodo and the Ring because, you know, I'm a nerd. So, right, Frodo's story. Frodo's getting the ring to Mordor. He sets out as part of a group together. He then realises they need to part ways. Eventually he gets to his destination only to find out that he can't follow through with the task. It's a rough outline of Frodo's story. So in each case and in each moment where things change, there is an event that leads to his mind changing. It's not necessarily where you think it would be. So the first instance of this, I mean, obviously you've got the moment where, you know, he's inherited the ring, Gandalf turns up, tells him it's the Ring of Power, and he has to go on the quest. Now, in the book, it takes months for Frodo to leave the Shire. Like, he moves house before he sets off to Mordor. He takes his sweet time. So, you know, like, we'll just talk from the moment when he sets off on the quest. And one of the key moments that changes Frodo is when Gandalf fails to meet him at the Prancing Pony. So this is in the movie, because in the book that there's sort of the episodes with the Barrow Wights and those creepy things that happen. But yeah, so for this exercise we'll talk about the movie, because I think that's more fair. A lot of people have seen the movie but haven't read the books. Or anyway, we'll go by the movie. So when Gandalf fails to meet Frodo and company in the Prancing Pony, Frodo at that moment wants and needs guidance, and he finds it in the form of Strider. But the event of Gandalf not showing up changes his attitude, changes his wants and needs, or changes his attitude to his wants and needs. So now he knows he must rely on others to help him, and making the decision to trust Strider shifts responsibility for the quest from Gandalf, who was previously giving him instructions, onto Frodo himself. He has to take responsibility for his own quest at that time, because Gandalf has given him instructions. You have to get the ring, I'll meet you in Bree, we'll work things out from there. So up until that moment, Frodo was thinking, all right, okay, I'll just get the ring to Bree. But it's kind of Gandalf's quest at that point. Gandalf's given him instructions, but he's sort of telling him what to do. At that moment, in Bree, he has to decide what to do with the ring and for his friends. And he chooses to trust Strider. So this change in Frodo and this change in his sort of perspective and wants and needs, this sets up the next phase. So he needs the Fellowship, because up until then his journey has been fraught with difficulty that would have been easier if he had a group of strong people to back him up. And this was proven by the addition of Strider to the party and how they relied on him in moments of danger. But the moment when the Fellowship is formed, that's not the moment when the shift occurs. The moment happened back at the Prancing Pony in Bree. That shift allowed Frodo to take charge of his request and rely on the help of the Fellowship. I mean, if Frodo hadn't taken charge of his quest, when it got to the Council of Elrond, Gandalf could have sat there and said, okay, that person take the ring to Mordor, and Frodo would have thought, okay, well, you know, Gandalf's in charge, fine. But because he'd already taken charge of his quest when the question came up, he said, I will take this to Mordor. I've taken responsibility for it now. And then when everybody else from the Fellowship decided to join in, he'd already learned and accepted the need for other people to be in on this. And that allows Frodo to move on with that. So that shift in his wants and needs happens at the Prancing Pony. Now, obviously things change from then on. There's a key death in Gandalf. And he starts to realise that he's not really part of the gang. He's kind of they're not all in this together. It's him. And he is the key player here, and he has to get the ring to Mordor, not necessarily everybody else. Everybody else could die. And he has to prevail. But by being there, he's putting everybody else in danger. And he's coming to this conclusion between the event of Gandalf dying, and then it's the event of Boromir attacking him because he's under the influence of the ring. That solidifies that in that moment. And then Frodo's needs and wants change. And previously he had needed everybody else, and he'd wanted to stay as part of the Fellowship. But at that moment, he needs to be alone and away from everybody else. And he wants to be alone and away from everybody else and doing this on his own. And his wants and needs change after that moment. But we see it. We see it happening. It's a dramatic event. So for the rest of the journey, he's driven by duty. And then at the end, he's driven by the ring and its overpowering will to survive, which is triggered in turn by Frodo being at the point of destroying it. So yeah, when you're working on a narrative, your key moments need to affect your characters, and that's where wants and needs shift significantly. And these key moments need to change your characters in a plausible way, and conflict must be followed by growth and reaction. Must. When this fails, you've got a big event unfolding, and then the characters just go back to exactly how they were before. And it feels wrong and disjointed for a reason, and for side characters, their wants and needs can change in relation to your main character's struggles as well. So if you have a supporting character who sees what your main character is going through, suddenly maybe they can't stand by anymore and watch it, or maybe they change allegiances, or maybe they can't cope with it at all and they withdraw. The effects of this event need to ripple through your cast of characters to make them plausible. I mean, it's good if you've got trauma that's felt by the victim. It's better if that victim and the trauma that they're going through then affects everybody else. Because if you have gone through a big trauma, it doesn't just affect you, it affects the people you know who are close to you as well. They are affected by what you've gone through too. And it changes everything sometimes for everybody involved. And so to do something big justice, it needs to have a ripple effect. And you need to see that. And if you're worried about getting it right, just workshop some scenarios like we did before. Take two characters, focus on an overarching theme from the traumatic event, present them with a situation that plays on that theme, and have a go at having a conversation between the two characters. It's good to take side characters out sometimes and put them in a room on their own and have them talk between themselves about something to really iron out their individual perspectives on what's going on. Because the way I sort of see it is that you've got your MC and you know exactly what they're thinking, but everybody around them is kind of in soft focus. It's unless you've done this and you really get into the heads of your side characters, they're kind of in there, they're a bit like hazy. Yes, you know that they've got motives and blah, 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 but you can't really get in their heads. When you take them out and you put them in a place and you see what they would say as individuals with regards to this thing, put them back in and it's like suddenly they're in high definition and these characters are so much more real. And as a result, their reactions can be so much more real to what's going on. And that makes everything clearer. Everything in the narrative becomes clearer. Something that somebody said was about being able to separate themselves from their characters. And I would say don't worry about being able to effortlessly separate yourself from the people that you write, because our ability to empathize is rooted in our our idiom. We can only empathize in relation to where we ourselves stand on a universal level. This is just true. We can't cut away from our sense of self and just float away and come at something from a completely different perspective that we've never experienced before, because at all times we are ourselves intrinsically. In fact, it would be horrible if we weren't. It would be very unsettling. So every person you create is going to have some of your DNA in it. I think it's inevitable. They're going to have something in there that is rooted to you, because everything that you write is coming from you, even if these people are very different. And the way I sort of see it is the book We Are Legion, We Are Bob by Dennis E. Taylor. All of the characters in in it a bit later on, they're all clones of the same person, but very different, because parts of the original personality or the original person, elements of themselves have just come to the fore, and are the dominant elements now in that clone's personality. Whereas in that clone's personality, that those elements are not dominant at all. They're and something else is at the forefront. So you've got this hugely diverse set of characters, all clones from one original, and you get some funny moments where the original's thinking, oh, I know where that personality comes from and I don't like it much, and because they see themselves in all of them, obviously, a little bit, and it's quite interesting. But I always think about that when I'm creating characters, and I'm thinking, okay, there's a bit of me in there, but I write some horrible characters who I am not like at all. And maybe that's actually it. Like, I create characters that I'm not like at all. But for that to be possible, I have to know what I'm like, and then do the opposite. So that's another way of doing it, is just be like, okay, how would I not react in this situation? Do that. Or, there's all sorts of ways you can do it, but at the end of the day, you yourself are the root. And you have to just accept that. And it's not a problem. It's not a big deal. You're not going to end up with a whole cast of characters who are the same person. You're not writing yourself. You're writing characters. They come from you. And that's okay. Just work with it. And yeah, I think there's a lot of trust involved in writing characters and getting diverse characters. And again, getting those characters out of your head, interacting with each other, you really get to know what makes them them, and it's a fun exercise. Things you don't know about your characters. Yes, I did this at the beginning. I said I'd come back to it. Okay, so be honest with yourself if there's a part of your character's background that you're not going to know or not going to focus on, and be okay with leaving it blank. This is mostly to do with side characters. If there's things, there are things we don't know about people, but knowing, if you're creating a side character you don't necessarily know something about, knowing the emotion of that thing is quite useful. So, for instance, if a character is particularly unpleasant, I can say I have no idea what happened in their childhood, right? But I know that when I look into that void, I want to feel deeply uncomfortable. I want to shudder, and I want to convey that to the reader. I want them to shudder too. But we're never going to know what that is. And I think that there's a lot of power in summoning the void. And you can get this across really well just by saying, okay, so imagine like your main character is saying, oh yeah, but where you grew up, it must have been sunshine and roses all the time. And you just say, this character just looks at them and says nothing and then looks away. And so much power can be put into summoning the void and not saying it. And as a result, like, not knowing certain things is fine. I mean, if your main character is never going to know the answer to that question, you don't necessarily have to know the answer to that question. And sometimes it's easier as well, because it's like overworld building. You know, you if you've thought about every detail of your world, you're tempted to take people on like a tourist guide, you know, tour of your world, bringing into focus all of the details that are just not in any way connected to your story. And that can be tedious. If you know every detail about your characters, the temptation is to share the details. And there are so, like, most people, I don't know anything about. In fact, I mean, I've seen character sheets that are so completely comprehensive that, like, if I tried to fill out that character sheet about myself, I wouldn't know the answer to half the questions. I'd just be there going, I don't know, maybe. And so there's a certain amount of, these are people, and we don't know everything there is to know about people. People are mysterious. And that's okay, you know, and knowing where the blanks are and being aware of that and being okay with it, I think that can still be very powerful, and that can be very powerful characterization. I mean, it could be that this main character had an excellent childhood, and when they say, yeah, your childhood must have been sunshine and roses, that character might still not divulge anything, but could just smile and nod. It's pretty great. Fine. Great. You don't have to know about it. But the emotion of the void, that's what I mean about the emotion of the void. The void of knowing is fine. Knowing whether it was happy, sad, disturbing, you know, that's the emotion of the void. And that's the important thing. So yes, knowing your characters, knowing what you don't know about your characters, taking your characters and playing out scenarios is great. Building playlists for them to help get you in the mood, and yeah, summoning the void. Summoning the void is really, really good. And changing their wants and needs depending on events that happen in the narrative. That's how you evolve them throughout. So yeah, I think that's a reasonable summary. Hopefully some of that was useful, if anything. Otherwise, you've just listened to, how long have we been going? 43 minutes of me rambling and saying absolutely useless things. But yeah, hopefully that was interesting to you, and hopefully I didn't ramble about Lord of the Rings too much. Yeah, okay, well, thank you for listening if you got this far. And yeah, I'll see you again soon in another video, I expect.